Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety meeting on October 31st, 2022. As we begin today, we have one item on our agenda, which is for the expedited bill 2122, the weapons, firearms in or near places of public assembly. I know that Council President Albornoz has a few things to say, and anyone who's associated with this meeting, please come forward and sit at the panel table.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. So I regret that we have to have this conversation today, frankly. But to provide a little bit of context, prior to the Supreme Court's ruling and the governor's unilateral action shortly thereafter, there was a clear all-of-the-above approach in terms of ensuring that people could not carry weapons, even with a concealed carry permit, in places of public gathering. That included all places of public gathering. But with the Supreme Court's action and the governor's action, we have now, as other jurisdictions across the state find themselves as well, are in a gray area in which, although there has been some precedent set forth by the Supreme Court, there are still many gray areas. What is undeniably true, however, is that that action, both by the state and now the governor, makes it more difficult for local jurisdictions to be able to enact common sense policies that prevent someone's Second Amendment right from infringing on the right of me and my family to be able to go to a movie theater and not have to wonder or worry if the person sitting next to me is carrying a gun on them. We have to acknowledge that we are living in uncertain times. And more guns, in my opinion, is not the answer. And so we are attempting to do our best to ensure that we provide restrictions that are reasonable, that adhere to the new guidance, as much as we disagree with it, but also ensure that the overwhelmingly majority of Montgomery County residents who share similar views to me and my family help protect themselves. And I also want to acknowledge we've got remarkably dedicated individuals from law enforcement who are here to testify before us as well. Their job is already difficult, on a good day. They will be the first to tell you that more guns is also not the answer. And in an OLO report that will be issued soon on gun violence here in Montgomery County, what that report found and what MCPD has been reporting to us for quite some time is that, yes, we do have some of the most restrictive gun laws in the state and here locally. And there is sometimes an argument made that, see, those don't work because there's still gun violence in Montgomery County. There's still issues in Montgomery County. So, and yet we still have the most restrictive gun policies. Well, the fact of the matter is those guns are coming from other states. Those guns are coming from other local jurisdictions that don't have the same strict policies that we have here within the state of Maryland or locally here in Montgomery County. So we're going to do our best to make sense of this new day that we are in and adhere to the guidance, but ensure that we also hold the values that have been carried forward by this community for quite some time in its general opinion with regards to firearms true. So that's what we're here to do today. The reason this bill is expedited is because our colleagues in the General Assembly will be taking this up in Annapolis in January. And we have had numerous conversations with our colleagues in the General Assembly. They are watching closely what we are doing here in Montgomery County because it could set some level of precedence in the deliberations and discussions across the state because we're tackling with the same issues that they are. So it's important we get this passed out of committee today so we can get this to full council as soon as possible so that the full council can vote on this and give our General Assembly the longest possible runway to be able to work through the legislative process in Annapolis this winter. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for your words. I did want to note that Councilmember Hucker is on his way, the third member of the committee, and should be here shortly, but we're going to begin. And I'd like to once again publicly thank Christine Wellens, who's the attorney who had the pleasure of working on this in an expedited manner. And if and I wanted to welcome the panel. If you would like to introduce yourselves, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Council Member Katz, and Council President Albornoz. Thank you for having us. Chief Marcus Jones, Montgomery County Police.
Good morning, Chief Darren Frank, Assistant Chief Darren Frank, Montgomery County Police.
For a moment, you had someone who really had looked at you.
He looks much better.
And good morning, Acting Assistant Chief Nick Augustine with Investigative Services.
And good morning, everybody. Captain Nick Pacerno, Director of the Special Investigations Division.
Thank you and welcome, and thank you all for being here. And with that, Ms. Wellens, if you would like to please lead us through this packet.
Certainly. Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair and Council President Albornoz. Expedited Bill 21-22 had a public hearing on July 26th, and as the Council President stated, the bill generally would prohibit the possession of firearms in or near places of public assembly with certain exemptions. It would remove an exemption that currently exists that allows individuals with certain handgun permits to possess handguns within 100 yards of a place of public assembly, and generally amend the law regarding restrictions against firearms in the county. And just to point out, Mr. Chair, what this bill does not do is affect other current exemptions that we have that allow individuals to carry firearms into places of public assembly, including the exemption for law enforcement or security guard licensed to carry the firearm. It doesn't affect the teaching of firearm safety or other educational or sporting use. It does not affect weapons or it does not apply to the possession of a firearm in someone's home, and it does not apply to. But there's also an exemption for business owners who have permits to carry firearms in order to protect their business. So none of those issues are affected. Just wanted to state that at the outset. And as the Council President mentioned, we have the backdrop of recent Supreme Court precedent. The Supreme Court's Bruin decision, which was just decided in June 2022, struck down New York State's concealed carry law, specifically their requirement that you needed proper cause, a good justification to carry your firearm. The Supreme Court struck that down. Similarly, Maryland had a proper cause requirement that has been invalidated as well. So that provides some context for the bill, and also in terms of the legal framework, just to note some of the background, and we discussed this in the context of Bill 421, the ghost gun legislation as well. Maryland law does largely preempt our ability to regulate in this area. However, it does carve out an exemption to the preemption, to the broad preemption, saying we can regulate firearms in the areas of places of public assembly and within 100 yards of the place of public assembly. So let me take you on to kind of the first substantive issue in the packet for your consideration, which is at page 5 of the staff memorandum. And this, or pages 4 and 5. So this relates to clarifying the definition of place of public assembly. And as you know, under Bill 4-21, the council expanded the definition to make it as broad as possible. Subsequently, we had the Bruin decision, which, although it does leave some ambiguity for sure, was quite clear that we can't wholesale restrict the carrying of firearms in a location just because it's a location where people gather. That was insufficient. And so on page 5 for your consideration are some amendments to the definition of place of public assembly that try to tighten it up a little bit so that it is more consistent, or hopefully fully consistent with the Bruin decision. It just takes out the extremely general reference to, a place of public assembly as anywhere some people may gather, but it still attempts to make the definition as expansive as possible. And in addition, it articulates, there are 5 places the Supreme Court said in Bruin, okay, these 5 places you definitely can restrict the carrying of firearms, those being government buildings, schools, courthouses, legislative assemblies, and polling places. So this potential amendment before you would include within it, would explicitly list those places that the Supreme Court said we can include. And then you'll see it also expands upon community health centers and long-term facilities to try to give those references a bit more specificity as well. So that's the first issue before you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. When the idea, like on page 5 in section 2, government buildings where they would be considered a place of public assembly, the parking lot associated with those public buildings, is it allowed in the parking lots?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mr. Chair. So if it is a parking lot that is owned by or under the control of the county, then that would be inclusive of it, that you would not be allowed to have the firearm there, or if it's within 100 yards.
Then I think either we need to have a definition that says that, or include that right on this statement, so that there is no question that someone can't just leave something in their car or stand at their car.
We can certainly include that.
Are you okay with that? Are you okay with it? Yeah, okay. Please, you're going to have to be the wordsmith, Ms. as you are on most of these topics, but I do think that's important.
Okay, happy to make that clarification. Thank you.
Any other comments so far? No? Okay, please, if you'll continue.
The second potential amendment that council staff is recommending for your consideration is, this is under item number 3, page 6 of the staff memorandum, and it involves including a severability clause into the bill itself to make very clear the council's intent that should any aspect of the definition of public assembly or of other parts of Chapter 57, the law governing weapons, if any part of that is struck down by a court, which we have to be cognizant of, especially in light of Bruin, that the council's intent is that the remainder of the law would still be intact. So in other words, would help ensure that the court would not strike down the whole definition or the whole of our restrictions against weapons in places of public assembly.
Go ahead.
No, I agree. I did want to make the point, should have done this up front, is that this does not prevent private businesses from ensuring that guns are not allowed. So if our local mall or movie theater or an area of private business, and unfortunately when you go to Texas or other parts of the country that have very unrestrictive gun laws, you see those no gun signs in a variety of different locations. So, and I want to stress to the public, we would like to include everything. We would, but we are restricted in what we can and can't do. So I don't want the message to the public to be that the council is only restricting these areas and not considering others. It's because of what we're bound by at this point, and we're trying to push this as much as reasonably as we can, given the circumstances. But I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, thank you. We're in agreement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 4 in the staff memorandum, we're at the bottom of page 6. These are suggested amendments related to the Maryland law. As you know, the council adopted Council Bill 421, restricting the possession of ghost guns in the county, and subsequent to that, the General Assembly adopted ghost gun legislation during the 2022 session. So in order to align the county ghost gun definitions with those of the new state law, and also in order to acknowledge that the ghost gun laws must be interpreted in accordance with federal regulations, there are some suggested amendments for you there. And really this would just be to, again, kind of try to eliminate any confusion by making sure that we in the state are, hand in glove with the same definitions.
I think there's alignment with that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lastly, the final issue that's noted for your consideration, bottom of page 7, it's issue number 5, and it's a technical correction. There was essentially a typo in the current section 57-7. The term transfer is listed twice. It was supposed to be, one of those transfers was supposed to be transport, so this would make that correction. This should have been included in the the last technical corrections bill, but I think I missed it, so
Okay,
that's all that is.
we're good with that. Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think, reluctantly, I move the amendments as presented, because I think, it's the best we could do given the circumstances. And then I have some comments after making that motion.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. It's going to be by acclamation. It's going to be 3-0.
Thank
And
you.
Council President.
Thank you. Chief, just a couple of thoughts, and you may not have the answers to this. We might have to follow up, but I know that to request a concealed carry permit, you have to go through our state police department and their process. Now, my understanding is that there has been a significant rise in Spruan in the number of requests for concealed carry permits, and that even prior to Bruin, that in almost all instances they were passed. But in very few instances was someone's request for a permit denied. Now, some of that was based on, not as many people applied because there weren't as many places that you could go with a concealed carry permit, but that unfortunately will no longer be the case. But I'd just like to give you the floor, Chief, just to talk broadly about, and you've shared some of this with us in your initial testimony, which we greatly appreciate, but this is obviously a sensitive area for law enforcement as well, and so I just would appreciate your comments and thoughts on this.
Sure. So, good morning again. You are correct, Mr. President, that there has been a significant rise in applications through the Maryland State Police for concealed carry permits, and that does raise some considerable concern for us in law enforcement as individuals who may decide that utilizing a weapon in order to either protect themselves or others in public places could raise some issues. And this is, I will try to make it as simplistic as possible. Even in law enforcement, we have a significant issue with individuals who either work in an undercover capacity or who are even off duty, who may be carrying their weapons in the public. And there may be confusion at times when there may have to be a decision that there is a disturbance that is occurring and an off-duty officer is involved and may not necessarily have the proper identification visible. And I'm not saying that they don't have their identification with them, but they don't have the identification visible that would make it clear to any individual, and most importantly to law enforcement, that individual is a law enforcement officer that is permitted to carry that weapon. There is a term utilized often called blue on blue, where in fact there have been incidents across this country where law enforcement officers in those capacities have been unfortunately shot as a result of an interaction that may have occurred and those individuals not being properly identified. It is one of the areas that we train on here in Montgomery County. It is a regional response of understanding that we all, and when I say regional, not only for Montgomery County Police and other local jurisdictions within the county, but also in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Under the Council of Governments, we've developed a process to help to identify law enforcement, federal, state, and local, so that if there is an interaction, knowing that many of us cross jurisdictional lines and we do have the authority to carry our weapons in an off-duty capacity, or even on duty for that matter, for those who may be working undercover, that there is a universal sign that we utilize. that says that we are law enforcement. Should we be confronted in order to drop our weapons, which we train ourselves to do in those manners, and in fact, then those individuals would know that we're law enforcement. Well, that's a concern now because the community won't have that. And maybe, I don't know if there's something that maybe at some point we may need to figure out in order to avoid any unfortunate incident. But that would be something that I would definitely stress, that I would not want any loss of life and when it comes to weapons. What we do know over the past year plus, where we are seeing an incredible rise in illegal weapons being transported, carried, and utilized in Montgomery County. What we do know, many times the sources of these interactions, sometimes with individuals, are simply what we would call confrontations that are occurring with other members of the public, and the weapon is being utilized in order to try to resolve this particular conflict, whether it's a road rage incidents. We've seen rises in road rage incidents where weapons have been displayed, maybe not fired, and maybe in some cases they have been fired, but in cases we know that they've been displayed. So again, I think it's an important piece about continuing gun education with gun owners. I think that's an important factor that county government should do. Along the way, the police department will be committed to assisting community members who make the decision that they want to, basically have their concealed carry and carry it with them often and out in the public, which, we can understand, but we need to also educate people about the safety of utilizing those guns, about backgrounds, understanding the background of you being out in public, not just being at a shooting range, I should say, that you would just be utilizing a gun, looking at a target. That your background is as important when you make that ultimate decision to actually pull a trigger, because you're protecting, even though your intentions may be well, and it may be, it may be the decision that you have to make in order, in your feeling to feel that you are protecting your loved ones or yourself individually, but understanding that there could be, should that shot not make impact with the intended target, that it could end up injuring or killing someone else because you're not aware of your background. And when you don't have that education, that again can be a concern that that this does more harm than it does good. And so we want to be a part of the educational process, as individuals will be allowed to carry their weapons in more public places. And again, understanding that, we would highly recommend that law enforcement still be the first line of defense in order to try to resolve conflict, as should it come to that. But should there be another way that it needs to be handled, then we know with the many incidents that occur across this country, we understand that. But we'd also want to make sure that people are, again, are well versed and understand the power of the weapons in which they utilize, and understanding the environment in which they may be utilized.
Thanks, Chief. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to recommend that not now, but at a future date, we are going to need to educate our public about the aspects of the new law, but also ensuring that a resident who is, by virtue of trying to protect themselves and their family, purchases a firearm and requests the conceal component, just that they have their eyes wide open on the potential problems that could create versus the ones they are attempting to solve. And so I'd love a recommendation at some point, Chief, on what a robust, comprehensive public education might look like, and what the cost of that would be. And if you can't cover that within the department's current budget, then we would like to work collaboratively with the executive branch and see what more we can do, but also with our partners across the state too, and the state police. And then lastly, As we will learn soon from this Office of Legislative Oversight report that will be issued soon, by virtue of it being challenging to collect data at the national level on gun violence because of laws that have been put in place, but we can do more at the local level to be able to collect information. And I think we're going to have to develop a very comprehensive system moving forward. Suburban Hospital, as an example, is the shock trauma center that receives all of the gun incidences in not just in Montgomery County, but in our general region. So they have a lot of data that I think all of us would benefit from seeing. And I think we should establish a baseline of that data in light of the policies that are being enacted by the Supreme Court. And I'm just going to say it. I'm sure there will be a push for open carry at some point. I mean, that is something that we should all expect. And so we need to make sure we do our best to hold the line, but do so in a way that is informed and is rational. So with that, I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Did you have any comment?
No, I'm glad we're having that discussion. And has anybody had a conversation yet with the rec department, with parks, about how they might educate the public if this is enacted?
Don't believe so.
Yeah. I mean, it calls to mind a couple things for me, and I'm really glad, Mr. President, you put this forward. I'd been thinking about this issue for years. You mentioned Texas. I grew up in St. Louis, and where they have more liberal concealed carry laws there, whenever I would go visit my family over the holidays, it's hard to miss all the signs in all the stores saying don't bring your weapon in here. And now I think post Bruin, you see those at Whole Foods, for example, in Montgomery County. But I think, like when we passed the law to ban smoking in the public parks, that required a public education campaign, as many other things have, and now you don't see smoking in the public parks very much. And we'll certainly minimize the conflicts and maximize the public safety if we have a really vigorous and well-funded public education campaign that includes all of our departments. So I'm really glad we're having that conversation and not just passing a law quietly, but going to try and engage all of our citizens on it.
And coordination is, thank you, and coordination is the key. I mean, it's going to be cross departments, but it's also from the rest of the state. I mean, if someone is coming in here from another county and they are allowed to do, then they need to know what they're not allowed to do here. And we don't want them to break the law, and we don't want them to be in a situation where they're breaking the law. So with that, I think, Ms. Wellens, are we good?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for all your help, and thank you to our friends in law enforcement for being here today and for keeping us all safe. Thank you. We are adjourned.